everyone, I'm Kevin, otherwise known as Forum BX257, here bringing you another 1980s G.I. Joe tour review. And today I'll be taking a look at the G.I. Joe's Arctic Assault Vehicle, the 1988 Arctic Blast, and its driver, Windchill. Neither Windchill nor the Arctic Blast make any cartoon or comic book appearances, unfortunately.
The Arctic Blast is a small vehicle. Here's a 3 3/4 inch figure, of course, next to it, just to give you a sense of scale. But it does seem a little bit smaller than it actually is due to the fact that it's kind of hollow. So let's take a better look at the vehicle just by itself. And you can see that it is actually a very well-armed little vehicle here. We have a pair of front-mounted missiles, or ski missiles. Skis on the top and the bottom, but a peg hole only on one side. And you'll notice that the detail is not symmetrical for each side. While it may look like you have a left and a right version of the missile for the left and right sides of the vehicle, you actually don't. And on the front, you have these twin Gatling guns, which are keyed together by this gear in the front. So you just move one, and the other one moves around. We'll just do that with the back end. We have a cockpit, enough for one figure, and of course a seat belt, which was common on 1988 and 1989 vehicles. It actually plugs in sideways, and that securely locks the figure into place. You have actually a few very interesting things, like a simulated joystick. It doesn't really stick out from the side of the walls here, so you can't actually put the figure's hand on there. You don't have a steering wheel, but you do have foot pedals, strangely enough. Of course, the detail there is actually just stickers. And on either side of the driver, probably for the sake of balance, but not really, I'll get to that in a moment, are these giant wheels for its primary mobility. On the front, instead of skis like most Arctic vehicles in the G.I. Joe line, we have skates, which are well sculpted and they do slide around on most surfaces. Though I do have to say that I'm not a particular fan of how they just cut off this one here for the sake of it being hollow, so that if you do pull it backwards, that's likely to snag on something. However, you do have these big giant wheels, which are very distinctive to the Arctic Blast, of course. But I would have thought that these would have been rubbery, but they're not. They're really hard plastic. That's a little bit disappointing, but that was just my preconceived notion of what the Arctic Blast would have come with. It also has these really big knobs on the surface for traction. And behind that we have two of these swiveling double-barreled cannons. Unfortunately, they don't swivel all the way around because they do kind of hit into the back searchlights here. However, you will notice that both of the cannons have grips. And right below here, in a very well-placed spot, well, these little, I don't know, skids, I suppose, you have a foot peg on either side. So you can stand a figure right there and have them manning these guns. On the inside, we have this engine detail, which is not covered up. This is one of these things where I was kind of thinking that looks a little bit cheap. How it just doesn't have a cover over the engine. It's all exposed like that. You have a kind of a surface area here with a hole. And I'll get to that in just a moment, but there's nothing that goes into that hole. Well, there's nothing over or under it, but I'm assuming that that's actually a towing point. And as for the lights, unfortunately, they don't move around. But one thing that I do have to say about the Arctic Blast is that the lights really give this thing sort of a recon feel. I guess a recon or patrol-like vehicle feel. Basically what I'm saying is that this is a souped up equivalent, not of a Ford Strike vehicle, but more or less a snowmobile. So here we have the 1983 Polar Battle Bear ski mobile, and you can see that they are actually relatively the same length, despite the fact that this was a $5 mini vehicle, and you're looking at around $10 for this thing, where it doesn't seem to be any more complex than the Polar Battle Bear, but it did come with a figure, so that's where it bumps up the price a little bit. And as for that hole back there, you would think that it would hook up with the universal tow hooks on the back of most G.I. Joe vehicles, but because of this, well, spoiler wing thing here, it's actually very difficult for anything to get in there, unless of course you're using like a tow rope or something like that. But the actual tow hook, it's very hard for anything to get in there and hook onto it. Rather unfortunate. As a matter of fact, the Polar Battle Bear ski mobile is actually one of the most narrow vehicles and is one of the few which can actually fit in there, but it's still not long enough to hook onto that hole. This thing came out at the same time as the 1989 Stalker version 2, better known as the Tundra Ranger. So of course, I immediately thought, well, maybe this thing can fit or do something with this. And as this hole is near the same size as a back peg, and some of the parts on here are back pegs, I kind of wondered whether this thing could be towed. So I just took off the outrigger, flipped it over, and put the little pontoon on the other way around, so that it's like this, so that the peg is still reaching down through here. And it does actually fit on there. It's a bit tight, but I don't know if that's because of plastic warping or whether it was really not meant to do this. And it does indeed fit in there. But as you can see, this thing is kind of wobbly, and I'm pretty darn sure that it wasn't designed for this. Now, I mentioned how the wheels are positioned in the middle just for balance. And here I have the driver in there. But if you place a figure, even a single figure, on the back here, this thing is actually a little bit unbalanced. You place a second figure on here, and it's just too heavy on the back. And while that was some unfortunate engineering, there is some cool engineering in here. You'll actually notice that there are some strange little holes here. And that's for Windchill's skis. You're supposed to put them together like this, and then thread them through on the side here. And they go through this portion and out here. Open and exposed seems to be the call sign of the Arctic Blast, because not only is the figure completely exposed, there's no windshield or any type of deflection, but the Gatling guns are also kind of exposed as well. There's nothing actually covering them, but if you just pop this thing off, you can actually see that there is some detail underneath there. A figure which came out in 1989 had an ammo belt, which he totally did not need, and you would think that it would be able to slip on there. Unfortunately, it really doesn't fit because of that detail underneath there. There just isn't enough room. It's rather unfortunate, because I think it would have been quite a nice look, almost like the Thunder Machine from 1986. And now it's time to find out, does a modern figure fit in it? And for my example of a modern figure, I'm going to be using my 2009 Rise of Cobra Footloose figure, because he is actually a fairly bulky figure, so that'll actually give you the worst case scenario. I just bend his legs, raise up his arm just so the seat belt is out of the way, and squeeze him in, and he fits just fine. It's hard for me to say exactly what the opposite number for the Arctic Blast would be on the Cobra side, because I tend to think of this as more or less an evolved form of a snowmobile, and Cobra really doesn't have that. However, if you do want to absolutely compare it to something on the Cobra side, well, obviously you'd compare it to the 1987 Wolf. However, the Wolf has a lot of armor and, well, shielding for the figures, and certainly more dedicated spots for more personnel. So, are they really equal? Well, no. And now to take a look at the Arctic Blast driver, Windchill, starting with his accessories. He comes with a medium-sized battle rifle. I'm not sure if this is based on a real-world firearm, though. Seems a bit generic for that. It's nice that it does have the details of having a cheek rest on the butt, as well as a large sporting scope, because according to the file card, Windchill is supposed to be a biathlete, so there's that. As well as his most distinctive accessory, his skis, which have little machine guns sculpted to the front. I'm not quite sure how that works, because the ski tips are curved upwards, and that seems to be the line of sight for that thing. It's like something right out of James Bond. However, the actual shoes themselves are really well sculpted, with both the tip and the back with a locking mechanism at the back here. Of course, that's all sculpted detail, but it's nice that they actually put that in there. As cool as it is to have little machine guns stuck on your skis, it is rather unfortunate they're kind of bulky. And as you saw when I was putting this into the storage slots on the Arctic Blast, at least one side of the machine gun was actually getting in the way. It was kind of rubbing up against the inside of the wheel. So that's an unfortunate problem, but oh well. At least there was storage space for them. As for the figure itself, this is the whole reason why I bought the Arctic Blast set. It was purely for the driver. This is a really cool figure. And quite frankly, with this accessories, he actually would have been a really welcome figure if they made him like a carded figure, just a basic carded figure without the vehicle. About the only fault I could really say about the figure is that they've gone and cheaped out and used the same hair color for his eye color, which is normally not a bad thing, but because it's yellow, he winds up having yellow eyes. He does have a rather sharp sculpt with rather inset eyes, so it doesn't really stand out as much as the 1990 topside did, but still, it's not a very good practice to have when you're doing paint apps. But other than that, he has a really nice outfit. I really love the classy sort of double-breasted jacket he's sporting here. It's rather unfortunate that he has these big blob camouflage on here. I mean, it's nice that he has camouflage, but I wish that it was a distinctive color from the rest of the dark gray that was used, because it's a little bit hard to see like where his shirt ends and where the collar is and all the buttons. That's all picked out in paint, but because it has the same blotchy stuff all over it, it sort of blends in, which is not the type of blending in you want your camo to do. It is kind of interesting that he also has the US stamped on his holster, kind of a World War II type of thing to do. He's also wearing jodhpurs, which at least I think these are jodhpurs, where the pants have these like big flaps on the side of the thigh, kind of like a 1920s director. I'm not sure if that's a callback to anything. He also has these nice little long boots, but they also have these they almost look like horse spurs buckled onto his ankles here, but I'm pretty sure that these might be adapters, like adapter shoes for the skis. So that's a very interesting little detail there. I can't really say that Windchill here is a replacement for any previous Arctic vehicle driver. So here we have the 1987 Avalanche, who is the driver for the Battle Force 2000 Subline Dominator, as well as the more famous 1985 Snowcat driver Frostbite. And they all have vehicles which actually support different roles. This is a tank driver, this guy is a half-track missile driver, and of course Windchill as a vehicle which is more suited for fast attack and recon. I honestly don't think that Windchill really has an opposite number on the Cobra side. Of course, I'm going to still compare him to the 1987 Ice Viper, who is the driver of the Cobra Wolf, a vehicle who's really well armored, well armed, and of course it was a two-man vehicle on top of that, which seems a bit of an unfair comparison between that and the Arctic Blast with its, well, zero armor. But the fact of the matter is that the figures are very well equal. Both of them are very well decked out with accessories. Of course, the snowboard on the Ice Viper here actually comes from the vehicle itself, but it was totally meant to be detachable and usable by figures. So I would actually consider that to be an accessory, and both of them could totally have been carded figures if Hasbro had wanted them to be. Now, if you're looking for the Arctic Blast or Windchill on the aftermarket, they're actually fairly easy to find, complete with all of their parts. They're not terribly popular. At least the Arctic Blast isn't, probably due to its very bizarre looks. However, I'm actually quite surprised that that still applies to Windchill because, quite frankly, I think he looks brilliant. But they're a fairly sturdy set, not much breaks on them. But there are two things that you do have to look out for. Of course, that is the fact that they're white plastic, which can yellow over time. So that's one thing you have to look out for. Of course, if you want a project, you could always take the time and use some hydrogen peroxide to bring the whiteness back. There is one very odd little thing, however, I have discovered, that sometimes you'll find that the little machine guns on the skis are gone. Now, these seem fairly sturdy to me, so I'm not quite sure how they're breaking off, unless kids, during the time that they're, initially playing with these things, are breaking them off on purpose. Which to me makes sense because they look like they could be little pistols on their own, and perhaps they might not really need them to be on skis and might just want the extra little pistol, so they just snap them off and use them as that. So that's something that you will have to look out for, and it might be a little bit hard to see in some photographs, as most of the time the skis are actually photographed this way, with the black on black being very hard to see in photographs sometimes. Because the engine bay has enough space to actually fit two figures in there and use them to over-weaponize the large scope here because he is a biathlete. Well, that's all the time I have right now. Please check out my Facebook page for more information and behind-the-scenes photos for these reviews. Thank you for watching this video, and stay tuned for next time to see another 1980s G.I. Joe toy review. See you then.